Joining me now, Brenden Nunes with SacTown 1140 and the Kings Pulse podcast. Brenden, thank you so much for hopping on. Let's talk some Kings. Let's talk De'Aaron Fox a little bit. He's been a lot of fun. Back in the lineup, did the team pass the test while he was gone?
No, not really. They had two really bad games, to be honest, against Houston that were pretty tough. But they found a way to work it out a little bit. I think that they did okay. It was a process for sure. Their big things are physicality, pace, and togetherness. And I think that the middle one is what's really missing when you don't have De'Aaron Fox, right? Like a big part of the reason they emphasize pace so much is that De'Aaron is probably the fastest player in the league with the ball in his hands. So I think that their offensive identity really struggled without De'Aaron, but they started to figure it out a little bit. And I think it's kind of typical. Any team that's missing their best player is going to go through some struggles, a little bit of your identity is missing when that guy is lacking. And I think that's exactly been the case with De'Aaron Fox because he's been I think, a superstar this year. He's been phenomenal. He's taken his game to another level from the step that we already saw him take last year that was progress when it comes to the trajectory of his career. So they didn't do great in his absence, but I think they stayed afloat. They're still sitting at 10-7, which is a good spot to be at, advancing in the in-season tournament for what that's worth. So I think that they definitely had some rough spots, but they stayed afloat. And I think that's all you can ask when you're missing your best player.
Oh, for sure. And like 21st in net rating isn't great, especially at this stage. There's some crooked losses in there that I think have really shifted those numbers. These are on cleaning the glass. 13th in offense. That's almost entirely attributed to the time the Fox missed. I looked at the numbers with him on the court. He looks great. Like the team looks great when he's out there. 20th in defense is also a little bit of a slight improvement, which is good to see. You want to see that slight progress, if anything. But I still want you to cook here. I want you to tell the world how great De'Aaron Fox is.
Dude, he has been ridiculous. Like, I already think that De'Aaron Fox has been a phenomenal player, but it's been on another level this season. I think the three big improvements have been his 3-point shot, where he's putting up 8.5 a game and knocking down 36.3%. 8.5 is a ginormous jump for De'Aaron. I got to pull up these previous numbers to make sure I'm getting them exactly right here. But last year it's 5 a game, and his previous career high was 2 years prior, 5.5, 8.5. Like he is getting the shots up. And I think there is an aspect of you don't love every one that he puts up because his best shot is always going to be at the rim or at the mid range. Those are his two elite areas. And I think this is just part of the process, though, that you need to gain the respect from the outside to unlock the rest of your game. So while sometimes it might be viewed as settling a little bit, I think there's progress there, and I think it's encouraging. And like I said, I think this is part of the process. I think the couple of bad ones throughout the course of the game will relax a little bit. And outside of the 3-point shot, I think it's been consistency, clutch player of the year last year, but a lot of that came with turning it on in the second half. And I believed that there was an aspect of he needed to get his other teammates involved because he's one of those elite players that can just flip a switch and turn it on in the fourth quarter. And not everybody can do that on a team. So you need to make sure other guys are in a rhythm to be able to step up with you in those clutch moments. But I think that De'Aaron has been doing it consistently throughout the course of the game. You look at this back to back they just had against the Warriors and then the Clippers. He played 77 total minutes in those games and put up 69 points. Like, second night of a back to back after he played 40 minutes, you played 37 and put up 40 points. That's superstar stuff. That's exactly what you want from a guy like that. And then I also think defensively. Coach Brown really talked about after that Golden State game that in the second half, he's switching between Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, which, says a little something about Draymond Green, I will say. But I think that De'Aaron has been phenomenal in those three aspects, and that's where we've seen the big improvement in the 3-point shot, the consistency on a night-to-night basis, but really in the first and second halves, it all being there, and then the defensive end. I really think that he's flirting with first team All NBA. He's averaging 30.7. That's fourth in the league. Like the way that people were talking about Shea last year and his rise, I really think De'Aaron is right there.
He's right there. And we've seen a lot of these young point guards step into, I think, the new era of the NBA and really flourish in the space that they're getting. The athleticism, the dynamic shooting off the dribble has been something that De'Aaron Fox, as you mentioned, like that's what makes him special. Is teams have to respect the speed. They now have to respect the 3-point shot. And when you're pulling this defense into multiple different directions, that mid range then becomes wide open, and he's become automatic with that jumper too. So that
Yeah,
has really helped for sure.
I don't
Um,
mean to interrupt, sorry, but for the first time, from what I remember, which it's only been about 3 years for me, I wasn't exactly the very, very beginning of De'Aaron's career when it came to covering the Kings. But the first time since I remember past 3 to 5 years against Dallas, where he was also just absolutely cooking them, Derek Jones Jr. is guarding him, and he started going over screens. And I was like, whoa, I don't think I've seen that for De'Aaron before. And that gives him the opportunity to get downhill and get exactly to those shots you were talking about. But the fact that I saw that coverage, I was like, this is different.
it's new. It's the new age of De'Aaron Fox leading the Sacramento Kings to new heights. It's been very cool to see. Unfortunately, who's not really leading to new heights right now is Keegan Murray, who I clearly jinxed when I decided, you know what, I'm going to pick him for most improved player. I think he's going to be the guy who becomes the most improved player this year. We had a nice conversation about him, and the shooting has been slow with him, but I think the defense has still been pretty good. What are your Keegan Murray thoughts just as he's been injured over the course of this last week or so?
Yeah, I think it's been easy to look at those numbers where he went from 45% from the field last year to 39 so far this year. Again, 13 games, right? 41% from three last year, 28.7 this year. Like those are going to go up. He's an elite 3-point shooter. I don't think last year was an outlier. I think we saw that during his time at Iowa. Like he is a legitimate 3-point shooter. And I think that's going to go up. But I do think that we've seen progress in a handful of different areas. Defensively, he's getting put on Anthony Edwards. There's times he's getting put on Steph Curry or Donovan Mitchell, and then also asked us guard some of these bigger wings like a LeBron James. And I do think it somewhat speaks to Sacramento's lack of options when it comes to guarding those sort of guys. But it's been great to see Keegan take on that challenge. And he looks like he's moving a lot better defensively. I think that's where we've seen the most progress from him. In the offseason, De'Aaron Fox and him have a really good relationship, and he spent a lot of time working with De'Aaron, including playing one-on-ones with him. And we just talked about how quick and dynamic De'Aaron is off the bounce as one of these guards in the league. And when Keegan is getting all of those reps guarding De'Aaron, I think that's done tremendous help for him when it comes to his perimeter containment throughout the course of this season. He looks totally engaged and just really weirdly looks more fluid, like in a way that you don't typically expect development to happen within players. He's been moving great defensively. I think he's bought into the rebounding. He's up to 6.2 from 4.6 last year. Small stuff like connective passing, tertiary playmaking, right? Just making the quicker right read, 2 assists this year from the 1.2. So I think there's been notable progress in those three aspects, and I trust that the shot's going to fall eventually, and I do think they go hand in hand. I think all the defensive effort that's gone in there is probably affecting his legs a little bit on the offensive end as well. But again, I think it's going to come around, and I do think there's been notable progress.
No, I do think that in the situation that Sacramento's currently in, he has had to bear a pretty heavy burden. He's a guy who defends a player like Kawhi Leonard, and when he wasn't there in this last matchup against the Clippers, that can certainly bear some ill in that particular side. So he's carrying a heavy burden, especially for a young player. So hopefully, like as he continues to grow into that, there should be no questions there. Like he's just gonna fit right in as the third best player on a team like this, maybe even better, especially down the line. Um, have your preseason opinions on the team changed at all? Is there anything that you thought would happen that hasn't happened, or is there anything that now excites you when you feared it before?
I think it's been about the same. Like the team has the same overall strengths and weaknesses of last season. I think that offensively, sometimes they haven't looked quite the same as last year. They're also missing a lot of good looks from three, and that'll even out over time. They have shooters. Kevin Huerter is going to shoot better throughout the course of the year. Keegan Murray, as we just mentioned, is not shooting 28% from three all year long. He's going to flirt with 40% throughout the course of this year. I feel pretty confident with that. And I think offensively, they will find their rhythm again. And I think they've started to. They had a couple rough games. And like you said, in the sample size we're talking about, a couple rough games really skews the numbers, right? So I think offensively, they're going to be fine. And it's about the same. Defensively, I will say, I think there's been more bright spots. And they still have plenty of duds. But I think there was like a 3-game sample where that second game in New Orleans, the first one they played, second night of a back to back, fourth game of a road trip, was a tough one. They got totally smacked. The next night, they come back, and Zion Williamson has been ridiculously good, by the way.
Right.
He gets left whenever he wants, and there's no team that can do anything to stop them, but specifically the Sacramento Kings, who struggle defensively, as I just mentioned. But bad defensive first half, second half, they lock in. They gave themselves an opportunity to win that game, even though they didn't come out on top. I think you saw the same thing in Minnesota, that big in-season tournament game that they won. First half defense, not great. Second half, they lock in and look better. And then the exact same thing against the Warriors, although it might be more of like a fourth quarter thing. First 3 quarters, the Warriors score over 30. Fourth quarter, big, I believe, 24-point comeback for the Kings. Golden State only scores 19 in that final quarter. So I think there's been more examples of good defense than there was last year, but they still are not rare, but the more expected and typical look for them defensively is struggling. But I think there have been more encouraging moments compared to last year where it's like one every 5 games you'd get a quarter. Where you're like, hey, that was something. I think you've seen it more this year, but overall, I do think it's the same. They're good enough offensively to win any night, and honestly, I think they're bad enough defensively to lose any night, which is what I said for most of last year, I will admit.
Completely fair. And when you don't necessarily change a ton of the rotation, when you don't change a ton of the personnel, it's not really a surprise. It's just about getting it's like tightening some things up. It's tightening some uh, loose ends in some ways. And I know you talked about the team wanting to be more physical, and then they seem to have applied that in some ways. But there's only so much that will ultimately change, just in the grand scheme of things. But there's a part of it mentally where you start winning these close games. You've got a guy in the clutch that you really trust, and you know how to win a little bit better, especially after going through this for a couple of years. So it's going to be interesting to track this throughout the season. I'm curious to see where their defense goes, whether it sticks at around 20th, if it rises, if it falls. Wouldn't surprise me for either. But I'll probably just say it stays about the same. Um, have you enjoyed the group play stage for the in-season tournament, and now that the Kings are onto the bracket?
I have, and I think I have a unique perspective, but my take on the in-season tournament is there's no real downside, right? Like obviously I've enjoyed it because the Kings are 4-0 and all
Insane.
of these games have mattered. They're the
Yeah.
one of only 2 teams in the West to go 4-0 in these games, them and the Lakers, who took the 1 and the 2 seed, obviously Sacramento sitting there at the 2. So I think it's been great. Like playing the Warriors will always have some added juice in Golden One Center. You know, the geographical proximity plays a factor here, obviously, going into against them in the postseason last year and sort of the stuff with Draymond just returning and after what happened between Draymond and Domas, there was always going to be energy in the building. But that atmosphere was phenomenal. And I think that a lot of it had to do with the in season tournament. And I think we've seen the players buy in. You know, after I saw Steph win, I think it was their first in season tournament game. I believe they played against OKC. And then he's talking about this is the first step on the road to Vegas. It's like, okay, if the players buy in, this is going to be fun. And from Sacramento's perspective, they have. Domantas Sabonis, you know, obviously European. It's talked about how these mid-season tournaments are very typical in Europe, and he likes the idea. And De'Aaron Fox has come out and said there will only ever be one first in-season tournament winner. And he related it to the Clutch Player of the Year that he won last year. He will forever in history be the first player to win the Clutch Player of the Year. And nobody can ever take that from you. And years down the line, if the NBA keeps it up, which is what I would expect, that will mean something. And I think there's value in that. I think they care. And even if they play it down as one of 82, because there still is that aspect, like as much as that Warriors game was in season tournament, they're also trying to even their season series because they were down 0-2. They're worried about playoff seeding when it comes to the actual main NBA championship, right? Everything plays a part here, but I do think it's added something, and the players seem to care. And I think that's all it really takes for this to matter. There's no downside. If you lose your first couple, then you go on as if this doesn't exist, if that's what you choose, and it's like nothing changed. But you win a couple, and you're in an opportunity to have some pretty fun and exciting games, and maybe you win the first one ever, and there only can be one.
Well, you know who I would pick to be the first ever in season tournament champion is the Los Angeles Lakers and LeBron James as the final MVP of that part. No, it's
Be fitting.
that
It
is
would be
definitely on
fitting.
their mind. That's definitely something that everybody is kind of thinking about over there. So you guys have your work cut out for you in Vegas, but I'm hopefully you get there. Hopefully, and I'm rooting for you guys for sure. That is going to be a very, very fun environment. And the Kings are made for it. De'Aaron Fox seems like he's made for it. And I think that this is going to be a very interesting kind of quarterfinal, semifinal, final. So hopefully it goes well, dude.
Yeah, it's high in the sky, right? But if Indiana and Sacramento face off in the finals, the storylines between these two teams would be crazy. Now, both of these teams making it, Sacramento and Indiana, is a long shot. But single elimination basketball, you never know. And it stands out to me that Woj is tweeting out this is the Elite Eight, and then he posts the picture of the current bracket, or De'Aaron Fox refers to like we want to get to the final four of the in-season tournament. This sounds like March Madness to me.
It does. It very
And
much does. It's
there's
a
the
cool thing,
infamous
dude.
clip. There's the infamous clip of De'Aaron being totally heartbroken, crying after they lost to, I believe it was UNC, and I don't remember Elite Eight or Final Four or whatever it is. Like this is fun, and I think they bought in, and I've very much enjoyed it.
We will see what happens. I am looking forward to it for sure. He is Brenden Nunes of SacTown 1140 and the King's Pulse podcast. Brenden, thank you so much for joining me, man. Let's talk again in 6 weeks, all right?
Sounds good. Appreciate you, Ryan.